Hello, my name is Jane Burke. I live in Denver, Colorado. Right now, I work as a curator in the Textile Art and Fashion Department at the Denver Art Museum. Before that, I went to UH and I got a interdisciplinary master's in Asian Studies and Mandarin. While I was there, I worked at the East West Center Gallery and what was formerly known as the Honolulu Academy of Arts. And after I graduated, I went to work at TCM, RIP, and then to Linikona, where I met Bundit. And then I went back to work at what is now known as the Honolulu Museum of Art. I've been back in Colorado for about 8 years now, but I truly left my heart in Honolulu. And I would say, after living in East Asia for a few years, for me personally, it truly is a crossroads that I identify with being a Korean adoptee. And so it's really an honor and a privilege today to talk to you about tropical fashion. In no way I am expert, and so I appreciate Bundit taking a chance on me to talk story, and I look forward to it. That's a great question. How would I present fashion in Honolulu? I will say that over the past year or so, I've been freelance curating some contemporary art shows with local Asian American artists. And I joke that I couldn't do the same show in Honolulu because, the starting point is so different. I think that the immersion into the diversity that is Honolulu, just again, you have a different reference point than in a place like Colorado, where I think that AIPI identity is still struggling to break free of this monolith. So one, yes, I think that it would be a challenge in some ways. I feel like, the tropics, the idea of the tropics maybe could be less centered around per se ethnic identities or populations, in the sense that I think that climate, right, and the climate crisis is really causing us to better understand that we're all connected and that everything is interrelated, right? With again, the current climate, I think it's teaching us a lot, and how I think that these barriers are challenging in the respect that, it's been so, it's really, in terms of fashion, been this sort of historical hierarchy, the same as, obviously the Eurocentricity of our history. And I think that that's what I'm interested in, is breaking down or decentralizing those cultural capitals. And so Honolulu being just kind of a prime place to have those conversations. It's interesting. I didn't really realize it at the time, but when I wrote my thesis, I was talking about, or attempting to talk about, the formation of national identity through costume, particular to Chinese minorities and specific to the Miao in Southwest China. And I think at that time, I didn't really know how to articulate that notion of how identity, is really seen in a museum environment, in some ways can be liberating. It can offer that some sort of agency, but it can also be this mode of perpetuation, right? And so in the case of China, it's to perpetuate, right, this sort of minority indigenous status that does not have a lot of agency behind it. And so I really realized I have this preoccupation really with the constructs of identity and how we get there, and how fashion is used as a tool. And so it's interesting to think about fashion in Honolulu. There are so many angles, right? You have traditional contemporary street style, you know, the commercial market and the luxury world. And it's interesting because for the past 6 or 7 years, I've been working on exhibitions that have focused on Parisian haute couture. So I think that that's equipped me with a different lens, one that I feel like I'm able to be more critical of because I'm more informed of sort of the inner workings, right? So essentially, you know, couture is, and in Paris, you know, is the only place you can say haute couture because it's really, they've taken ownership of this idea of, you know, this heritage, this notion of heritage and passing down these traditional processes that only few artisans still have knowledge of. And so I think that that is really applicable to anywhere, right? Any traditional culture. But really the Parisian haute couture system is really able to elevate it into this notion of high fashion, right? Whereas I think the rest of the world is still seen as ethnographic. And that's something that I'm really interested in shifting, right? The narrative around what's considered ethnographic and how, you know, it might be perceived to, you know, to show grass skirts and loincloths and muumuu and even kimono and sari. You know, I think that that's what I am sort of working with right now in terms of how do you display or talk about tradition in a contemporary context. And so right now we're working on an exhibition with the fashion designer Carla Fernandez, who is based in Mexico City, but is really, I think, a new model to follow in terms of, you know, ethical and sustainable fashion in terms of her collaborations with Indigenous artisans in order to, again, preserve that knowledge that's mostly taught orally, you know. And so I think that her impetus to really highlight the fact that you know, this is something that tradition, one of her philosophies is tradition is not static. And I think that that's what she does best is she's able to work with artisans and still employ these techniques and processes, but then can translate them into something that appeals to the contemporary market in a very fashion forward way that's you know, avant-garde, and people can see, you know, that, you know, another philosophy she has is that, you know, handmade is the new luxury, which I think is true, especially again with the environmental crisis. I think that we're going back to these pre-industrial processes that are less harmful, and really making smaller quantities, you know, all of these things that I think that fashion still needs to remedy in order to be in tune, right, with the crisis at hand. So really, my interest in fashion is looking at the way that tradition can teach us, right, sort of future methodologies and that marriage, right, of this ancient wisdom coming from the architects of these garments that have withstood the test of time for a reason. And so with tropical fashion, I think it's really interesting how you could really compare sort of the blueprints of these iconic garments that are synonymous with the tropics in a way that is more about a universal need, right? A concept of what does the future look like in the tropics, and what and how can fashion be part of the solution, right? How can we work towards sort of making a more inclusive and you know, have an impact in a positive way that allows people to feel agency in what they're wearing, and also be really environmentally conscious. So if there's if there's a way to do an exhibition on all of that, let me know. Yes, of course, the muumuu. We couldn't talk about fashion in Hawaii without the muumuu. Um, I was lucky to inherit a vintage collection from a woman who was a transplant from New England and has Betty Mumu from probably the late 70s through the 80s. And I really love the fact that Mumu is so democratic. Really, again, it isn't ascribed to one ethnic group per se, and clearly it's one size fits all. And again, I love that it's really a source of identity and pride and heritage in Hawaii, and rightfully having a resurgence with Mumu Month, which is coincidentally, I think, this month. And so, yeah, I find that Mumu is similar to, for me at least, kimono and sari, in the way that the form more or less stays the same, but it's really the prints and patterns that become the part that catches your eye. And so I think, again, kind of still thinking about how to present tropical fashion in Honolulu, it's interesting in how you can really tell the history through these prints and patterns, and sort of see, like any form of fashion, following the trends. In this case, this is one that is a calico print that is one of my favorites of Betty Mumu. But it's really interesting how this print was really produced in India and then popularized again in Europe and England, and then through New England, and then across the prairie, literally, because my reference point is Little House on the Prairie, and then into Hawaii again. And so I think that circularity is interesting. And in the mainland, you may not recognize it as a muumuu by the print, but you can definitely recognize it by its form, which is unmistakable. So another print that I think speaks volumes again to the history of Hawaii is the Palaka print. And here's a Palaka muumuu. And this has been, I think, a really interesting history in terms of, again, coming from Europe, traveling through England, and then really being adopted as plantation workwear at the turn of the century. And then basically by the 30s, it's permeated into all of society as this fabric that people really see as sort of the kama'aina, or the print of Hawaii, right? And so I think it's fascinating to have this fabric be synonymous, this with Hawaii, even though it has, these sort of European, British, roots. And then we see this, I think, real resurgence again, because it is like a way to reclaim identity through this fabric. And what's fascinating, is that the ubiquity, right, of these patterns and forms then give rise to again this sort of need to diversify. And what I think is interesting is learning that the Palaka print really gave rise to this notion of what people know as the aloha shirt, and differentiating when you were at work and when you were not at work, and that the aloha shirt originally was to demarcate the times of the day. You put on this other print to say it's pauhana. And now what's fascinating is that, again, locality is that, an aloha shirt in Honolulu in Hawaii represents business casual, and yet, everywhere else, essentially, at least in the mainland, the aloha shirt implies, this ultimate, like, sort of escapist vibe, right? Like, it's opposite, it's dressing down, whereas in Honolulu, it's dressing up. So I love kind of, again, those implications that change depending on where you are. And so of course, again, going back to fashion in the tropics, yeah, what the prints can really say is a lot. As far as design, I don't think that there's anything I could really improve upon. Maybe just bringing things again back from the past. I mean, something that's still really relevant is the sarong. I think it would be really fascinating just to see the different variations on how sarongs have evolved, sort of. But you know, you can't really touch it. It's you know, multi-purpose, genderless, essentially, and you know, again, I think that the minimalism and the multi-purpose aspects of it are just something that hopefully it stays, you know, in the lexicon forever. And the other things that come to mind are like, I remember in Homa's collection, there's these a set of basically underwear from China, and it's essentially these beaded these beads of bamboo that have been strung together for underwear, and that, you know, Chinese used to wear under their robes to protect themselves from sweating. So essentially it was a barrier between your skin and the fabric, similar to sort of how, you know, the car seat cover, when you sit on your hot car seat, is protecting you from that heat. It's the same concept, which I think is so cool. I don't know if we could really walk around with just bamboo beads, but it's a thought. And, you know, again, I think that I just, I'm obviously preoccupied with sort of traditional dress, and another, you know, in another life, I would want to wear monk's robes. I know it's not appropriate or practical by any means for me in this life per se, but, you know, just the quality, you know, the muumuu-like form that's very forgiving, and then the sash, like this beautiful, elegant sash where you can, you know, store things or provide shade. And I think the fact that you can, you know, wear it essentially for your whole life, right? Like even if your body changes, you know, again, it's something that isn't disposable. But realistically, you know, even monks, I found, you know, in Bhutan, for instance, we were in the plaza, and a young monk was there who had taken off his robes, and underneath he was wearing like essentially an Adidas tracksuit. And so that was really telling, right? That like everyone has this sort of, most everyone has this desire to be an individual and to express sort of their modernity through fashion. And so I think that's an example of how we can't totally bring the past back to the future, but that there's some sensibility again in that uniform dressing that I gravitate to. Another example of this, you know, sort of that fusion of tradition and modernity is the women in Honolulu who are from Micronesia and wear these amazing skirts that I still remember and have still in my collection. This is, you know, their cotton floral applique skirts. And, you know, it's so beautiful that they continue to wear the skirts, but they wear them essentially with t-shirts and in my memory, like vintage t-shirts. So I think that again, you know, kind of like the monk with the tracksuit, and in these ways, that's really what, to me, tropical fashion is about, and less maybe about the redesign, but sort of the reinterpretation and the restyling, I would say, of how we dress and how it's adapted to express multiple identities, right? Not just your your ethnicity, your nationality, but also your individual identity, which again is such a universal impulse. So that didn't quite answer your question either, but yes, just reinvention. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity and thank you for being such an inspiration. I still really look up to your sensibility and still have 2 bags that you made that were silkscreen. This used to be yours, which they're from Goodwill. So I love how you infuse this sort of humor and humility into these very experimental and ambitious projects. And that really, that you're questioning, you know, what our basic needs are at this point and how can we design around our world in terms of a holistic approach again. And I think that's what I'm interested too in fashion. And I would say in artist social practice and how, you know, there aren't really these siloed delineations anymore. I think it's really conceptual in the sense that we're all striving to somewhat find solutions within the work. And one project that I'm working on right now is related in that it's a couple based in Mexico City, and they started out with a mobile atelier that services intentionally homeless youth in order to, you know, redesign the clothing on their back, literally, for, you know, more protection, utility, and ultimately, you know, personal expression. So it's really a beautiful project where, you know, they're empowering and giving these youth agency through fashion and through this redesign of things that already exist. And that's really the main focus, you know, not to bring anything more, you know, that's unnecessary. And so really this youth culture who are on the streets of Mexico have so much to tell us. So I hope that project comes to fruition at some point, but in the meantime, I'm really looking forward to seeing your exhibition and to seeing you in person very soon. So thank you again, and until then.